What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today we have a guy that's making a case for the idea that atheism is wrong. I'm open to being shown that I'm wrong for not believing in God. So what kind of arguments do you got there, bud?
In order for us to all live and exist on the earth, the sun had to be exactly the right temperature and mass, or we would all be dead. The earth is exactly the correct distance from the sun. If it was just slightly closer or slightly farther away, life could not exist.
What? Oh God, hold on. I gotta. Sorry, I had to mask up before I caught any of the ignorant ass shit that was just expressed in this short opening here. Because, I mean, honestly, you cannot be this ignorant about our planet and our universe in general. Because basically, if the sun were different, then we would be a different planet in a different orbit around the sun. We would essentially be in a totally different solar system. Jesus fucking Christ. If you want to know how dumb these arguments for God are, then please stay tuned. Alright, heathens, well, if you want to get that mask that you saw me wearing just now, you can go down below to the merch shelf or just go to my Teespring store, which I'm sure that I've got linked in the description. You can find your own GE Pride mask if you want to, or I'm sure there's a link right here on the screen that you can type into the address bar of your favorite browser and you can go and get it there. Now, as long as you don't mind possibly catching the ignorance from the video that we're about to watch, what you're going to find is some very basic arguments for the existence of God, and inherently against atheism. Alright, so let's see what these basic-ass arguments are.
Everything does not come from nothing. That which is so chaotic does not make that which is so organized. The impersonal does not make the personal. And the unintelligent does not make the intelligent.
Really? Even for 2017, this is an old argument. But you still have people that constantly use this straw man as an argument against atheism and for God. Religious apologists should really stop using this argument for two reasons. First, because only creationists, or rather people with a religious mindset, argue that the universe just popped out of nothing. So really, you're just describing your own position here, not ours. Second, you anthropomorphize the universe in order to make it seem like we need a conscious agent for the universe to exist. I mean, this argument is so circular, you could kiss your own ass with it. And there's really a third reason why religious apologists should stop using this argument. They make a logical leap to God due to their own personal incredulity when it comes to the origins of the universe. Just because they don't understand how the universe could have come into existence without a creator doesn't mean that a creator was needed in order for the universe to be here. Honestly, religious apologists should really just stop using this argument altogether. Just stop it.
Scientists from everywhere agree that the possibility of life arising by chance is the same possibility of rolling a 6 on a dice 5 million consecutive times in a row.
Oh, citation fucking needed. Also, this is an argument from large fucking numbers. The probability of life arising naturally is 100% because it's already happened. More to the point though, if we have a huge pool of chances for something to happen and it does not have a probability of 0%, then it is bound to happen. I mean, this is basic statistics here. You should probably know basic statistics if you're going to be making this argument. But then again, maybe you do know statistics, and you're just looking to confuse your audience with large numbers. I'm not saying this guy is. I'm just saying we don't know.
All logic predicts that if you have nothing, oh, guess what? Nothing will happen. In the real world, we never see anything jumping into existence out of nothingness. But atheists want to make one small exception to that rule, namely the universe and everything in it. The universe came into existence with extreme precision.
Okay, first, he's confusing the scientific idea of nothing with what he thinks nothing is. In a space of nothing, as it is scientifically defined, there is still energy that is fluctuating within that nothing. This opens up the potential for something to happen inside that nothing. Second, he's suggesting that atheists are especially pleading for the origins of the universe. Atheists are not the ones that are special pleading a universe from nothing. Religious people do that. The scientific explanation includes a natural process for the inflation of the universe. Considering that every event that we have known to occur in the past has had some natural process to describe how and why it happened, it seems like the unreasonable position is to just throw up your hands and say God did it. Third, he makes the baseless claim that this universe came into existence with extreme precision. Considering that the distance from the sun to the earth regularly varies on the order of 5 million kilometers, doesn't exactly seem precise. But ultimately, this guy is leading up to this argument.
Atheist Stephen Hawking and Steven Weinberg put it this way: if the expansion rate of the universe was changed by 1 second before the Big Bang or after the Big Bang, we would not be here. It would have either have collapsed or it would not have expanded. Another example is if you change the gravitational force by 1 part in 10 to the 40, we would not be here. Now, what's 1 part in 10 to the 40? It would be like if you took a tape measure and you ran it across a field that was 1 mile long, and if that tape measure was 1 inch short of that mile line marker or 1 inch over that mile line marker, we would not be here. Now, in reality, we're not taking a tape measure across a field that's 1 mile long, but the entire known universe. You change gravity by that much in our entire known universe, and we do not exist.
This is an argument from fine-tuning. The inherent problem with fine-tuning arguments is that it requires the ad hoc assumption that the constant values that we find can't be some other value and still get a universe. It's possible and plausible that different values for these constants exist. If these values were different, then how those constants interact with our reality could also change as well. The argument that the constants of this universe are fine-tuned by a creator is just not a tenable position. The main reason being that they are the ones that have to prove that these constants can't have any other value and produce a universe. Not just our universe, but any universe.
Think of a battleship. It's about 130,000 some tons. It's the length of about 4 football fields, several stories on that thing. You got about 5,000 or 6,000 people on it. Now, if you had to change the weight of that battleship by less than a trillionth of an electron, we would not be here if that battleship was the universe. That is how incredibly designed the universe is.
This is actually a really good example, but not for the reason that he's thinking. If you changed one aspect of that ship, then it would essentially be a completely different ship. Not all ships have the exact same design. Let's just say that you change the acceleration due to gravity in the buoyant formula, or the buoyant force. Then we would just inherently design ships differently to work with that new formula. This correlates with his argument for the universe in that these constants could be different, just work in different ways, and therefore produce a different kind of universe. But ultimately, what I want you to get out of this is that we do not know what would happen if the constants were different. But then again, I'm not the one that's making this argument. He is. He's got to be the one to show us why those values cannot be different. Without that, he's literally just speculating that a universe couldn't exist.
In order for us to all live and exist on the Earth, the sun had to be exactly the right temperature and mass, or we would all be dead. The Earth is exactly the correct distance from the sun. If it was just slightly closer or slightly farther away, life could not exist.
What? As I previously stated, the Earth's path around the sun regularly deviates by 5 million kilometers. Not only that, but the habitable zone around our sun is 106 million kilometers wide. This is simply not as precise as this guy is leading you to think. So we are regularly, slightly, closer and farther away from the sun. Also, if our sun was different in some kind of way, then we would still need to be in the habitable zone around that particular star. Habitable zones are different for different stars. I really don't understand why this argument is appealing to anyone.
Christians are able to explain why everything is so fine-tuned and exactly perfect for life to exist. But atheists, on the other hand, are unable to explain the remarkable coincidences for life to exist.
And all that you can come back with is, God did it. That's not an actual answer for anything. Ah, dang. How did my car go missing? God must have done it. Jesus Christ, how did I get an A on this test? Obviously, God did it. Can you see how God did it is really just not an answer at all? It doesn't actually tell us anything. I mean, true, it is an easy answer, but we also don't use this answer for like rain or earthquakes. That's because we understand how those things naturally occur. Just because we don't exactly understand the origins of the universe does not mean that God did it is an inherently better answer.
As the famous scientist Stephen Hawking once said, if things were different just by a hair or a small degree, life could not exist.
I mean, if anybody can find a quote even remotely close to this, I would really appreciate it. I couldn't find it. But I do feel like it's not exactly something that Stephen Hawking would have ever said. Because here's an actual quote by Stephen Hawking. One of the basic rules of the universe is that nothing is perfect. Perfection simply doesn't exist. Without imperfection, neither you nor I would exist. So you saying that everything is perfectly designed and backing it up with Hawking supposedly claiming that everything is perfectly fine-tuned for life seems to go against what Hawking actually thought. And if you can find a quote similar to what he claims Hawking said, I would really appreciate it.
Explosions destroy order. They don't produce order.
Smoke weed every day.
However, if we accept that the universe and everything in it came from nothing, well then we have to follow that to its logical conclusion. This means not only all the physical material of the universe was the product of nothing, but other things as well. We are forced to accept that nothing, which has no mind, no morals, and no conscience, created reason and logic, understanding and comprehension, complex ethical codes, a legal system, a sense of right and wrong.
No, there was no explosion. There was a fluctuation in a quantum scalar field that resulted in the inflation of the universe. That is what the leading scientific explanation is. What he's doing is he's using the colloquial term for the inflation, being the Big Bang Theory, to insinuate that it was some kind of explosion. That is called a straw man. The rest of this section really doesn't make any kind of sense whatsoever. He seems to think that you need a creator due to just the simple fact that morals, logic, and reason exist. That is a complete non sequitur because those two things just simply don't follow each other. I mean, if humans didn't exist, then those particular things like morals and shit wouldn't exist either.
If God does not exist, then everything is permissible. Why would it be wrong to kill just one innocent person if it made somebody else a lot happier? Why was what Hitler did wrong? Because according to the laws of nature, to the atheist, that should be perfectly permissible. If there is no God, well then our life and our death should be no more of a big deal than a goldfish dying. If people are just chemical accidents, then why get upset at one for killing another? You wouldn't get upset for baking soda reacting with vinegar. That's just what chemicals do. And so the concept that human beings are valuable and not just animals or chemicals is contradictory.
I like how this section seems to be very ignorant of all of the atrocities people have committed in the name of their own respective gods. To suggest that without God everything is permissible really ignores how society controls human behavior and what is acceptable. Morals are created and managed by the organism that holds them. That's why some animals seem to have a fundamental moral foundation. We are not special in that we are the only organisms with moral foundation. Also, God doesn't necessarily judge you on the actions that you perform in this life. I don't know why that seems to be their go-to argument. In some cases, all you need to do is ask for forgiveness and you're good. As long as you believe in Jesus, that's all God judges you for. So you can understand my confusion when you use this moral argument for God.
By using that which makes no sense given his worldview, the atheist is being horribly inconsistent. He's using God's laws of logic while denying the biblical God, which makes such laws possible. Atheists say the universe created itself. But in order for something to create itself, it would both have to exist to have the power to act and not exist in order to be created at the same time. This is a contradiction and a silly position to take based on all known scientific understanding. And so since the universe could not create itself, it had to have a beginning. The only logical conclusion is the universe had to be created.
No, God did not create the laws of logic. The laws of logic are descriptive to what we experience in this reality, but they are definitely not prescriptive as to what can exist or does exist in reality. That is the basic problem with this argument. The inability to distinguish descriptive from prescriptive. Next, he's conflating our universe with reality. These two things can and do exist separately. There could quite possibly be multiple universes in this reality. We don't know for sure, but we also know that there's nothing that prevents that from happening. Reality most probably created the universe itself. We have a good idea of how that process happened, but regardless of that, considering the fact that it did happen once, it's bound to happen yet again. Just like life. He uses this conflation between the universe and reality to suggest that the universe couldn't have created itself, and therefore needs a creator. Religious apologists have yet to establish that reality can't create a universe, so that just ends up being an ad hoc baseless claim that reality can't.
How can you explain the fully functioning universe with all its complexities without some power source? Because just as a small example, who put the universe in motion? The Earth weighs 6 septillion 500 sextillion tons. That's heavy. Yet it hangs on nothing and it sits in space moving at 1,000 miles an hour. That's how fast we're currently moving. And it sits there in perfect balance and precision. And so we are moving at 1,000 miles a minute while spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, and there's no rockets or jets. Where's the power? And the sun, which we are moving around while spinning, is also in orbit, moving at a high incalculable rate of speed. I mean, we could do this for hours.
Before we understood what the water cycle was, it was just as mysterious as the beginning of the universe. Can we fully explain how the universe came into existence? No, we can't as of right now. We may never know every intricate detail to the origins of the universe, but we don't necessarily have to. Keep in mind that everything that we couldn't naturally explain in the past was eventually explained with natural processes. So, to me, it seems like it's rather irrational to suggest that just because something seems complicated or insurmountable, that inherently means that God had to do it. This would literally be called a God of the Gaps argument.
When you look at the design and the complexity of human anatomy, the atmosphere, oceans, insects, animals, galaxies, and much, much, much more. All of creation clearly and undoubtedly points to a designer. It takes a crazy, insane amount of faith to believe that there's not, because there's living proof every single which way you look.
Well, luckily, the appearance of design does not necessarily indicate that it was designed. This is one of the most popular apologist arguments that exists. Our brains are pattern-seeking, so a lot of times we perceive design when there's really not any kind of design. Apologists love to use this particular argument to try and trick people into thinking that the universe or nature or anything of that sort needs to be designed. They forget that nature itself molds things into working systems without the need for a creator. Until apologists show that the natural world requires a supernatural intervention in order to function, the argument from design remains as a piss-poor attempt to prove that God exists.
Bill Gates, you may have heard of him, said that DNA is like a computer program
far, far more advanced than any software ever created.
Messages only come from minds. We know of no natural law that can create a message.
Bill Gates was using an analogy of DNA and computer code to explain how complex DNA actually is. Obviously, chemical processes in the natural world are going to be much more complicated than computer code. He wasn't saying that as if DNA and computer code are exactly the same. He also says that messages only come from minds. I would say that messages are interpreted, like a bee that interprets the colors of a flower to know whether or not they should harvest pollen and nectar from it. That would inherently be a message or communication system, and those came about naturally through evolution. So yeah, messages require minds in order to interpret them. DNA can be interpreted that way too, but ultimately it's a chemical that's guided by the laws of physics and chemistry.
A single-celled creature, or one strand of DNA, has 1,000 complete sets of encyclopedia volumes in it. DNA has that much information. Now, to believe that that resulted by natural causes without intelligent intervention is like believing that the Library of Congress came about from an explosion in a printing shop.
Most scientists believe that the coding behind the DNA molecule points to an intelligence far exceeding what could have happened by natural causes.
In fact, the sequence of letters of DNA is not determined by chemistry. It's information. And what we've learned, it has nothing to do with the four natural forces. The complexity of DNA has caused many scientists to go from atheism to deism due to the fact that the complexity is something far greater than we can comprehend.
Oh god, citation fucking needed again. For all this bullshit. First, we could definitely use DNA as a storage system. It takes us interpreting that DNA in order for us to get any kind of meaningful message out of it. I mean, this guy even fails to define what information is. Until you define what you mean by information, you can't really tell me that the chemicals encoded in DNA is some kind of message. That's not to say that I think that DNA doesn't have, like, the blueprints for life and all this other stuff. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm just talking about this guy's inability to define information in a way that would lead us to God being the creator of DNA. Also, he used a variation of the tornado through the junkyard, but this time he used the Library of Congress. The reason why both of these analogies are terrible is because we don't have natural processes to explain how a 747 or the books contained in the Library of Congress could have come together without any kind of human intervention. But we do have natural explanations for how life evolved on Earth. That is the fundamental issue with these arguments. Also, I'm going to need citations on how these scientists are somehow convinced by the complexity of DNA to become a deist. I mean, honestly, you shouldn't be convinced that God does exist just because something's complicated. I also highly doubt that most scientists believe an intelligence is behind DNA. Finally, the notion that DNA sequences are not somehow controlled by chemical processes is just ignorant as fuck.
The teaching of the Bible is that there is a God who created the universe and the earth and all the organisms living on the earth. This is shown to be true and consistent with scientific discoveries, that there is a non-material third fundamental entity called information that originates only from an intelligent source. FYI, the universe consists of more than just mass and energy, and the information we find within the DNA system. The complexity of life clearly points to being originated by an all-powerful, all-knowing Creator God.
Oh. So first, you're just baselessly asserting that the Bible is accurate and that God created everything. You have yet to establish that as a fact. Technically, I would be considered Gnostic on the idea that the God of the Bible exists, mainly because the God of the Bible doesn't really seem to match reality. The Old Testament's history is just all fucked up, and the New Testament is just a made-up mess. You have no evidence that information can only come from a mind. In essence, you're relying on people's ignorance of these subjects in order to convince them that a God has to exist.
Anyone who disagrees with these laws and conclusions must falsify them by demonstrating the initial origin of information from purely material sources. And by the way,
That has never scientifically been achieved. You're not an accident. You're not a mistake. You were built for a purpose, and that is to know and have a relationship with God for all eternity.
You're just saying that because that's what you've been told all your life, not because that's what the truth of reality is. In fact, reality doesn't really give a shit about who you have a relationship with. You haven't been able to define what you mean by information, let alone the origin of this information. Everything in this reality came about naturally. So any information that would exist would ultimately have a natural explanation for it, regardless of what that explanation is. This entire video that you produce relies on age-old debunked arguments that really shouldn't convince anybody. But they do represent some of the more popular arguments that apologists regularly make. You mostly rely on God of the gaps type of argumentation in order to suggest that it's ridiculous to think that this universe wasn't designed by God. You dazzle people with complexity just to show them how much they don't know about reality. And you baselessly claim that scientists agree that God has to exist. If I could sum up my response to this entire video in one quick phrase, it would be, citation fucking needed. Thank you, heathens, for joining us today. If you will, please let me know what you think about this guy's arguments down in the comments below. Did they convince you that God exists, or do you think that they're the same tired old arguments that we've heard time and time again? Let me know down in the comments below. Hey, while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like videos like this. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens!